Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Talking Cryptocurrency podcast. I'm your host, Jason Rigdon. On this episode of the show, we are talking to Chris Boscolo of lifeID. They're building an open source blockchain-based platform for self-sovereign identity. They're trying to put you in control of your own identity. This was a great interview, but first, I've got a quick message. I really hope you like this show. I put a lot of work into it. If you do like it, would you please consider doing something for me? Give me a review on Apple Podcasts. Now, if you're a hardcore podcast listener, you are probably sick of hearing this. Every show begs for reviews, and it's a little annoying, but it does make a big difference. Those reviews help people decide to subscribe. They help guests choose which shows to go on. Those ratings and reviews for the shows are a direct way you can help this show grow. So, if you like this show and you want more, please help me. Take the time and give the show a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or iTunes, or whatever they're calling it now. Hello, and on this episode, I'm here with Chris Boscolo of lifeID. How are you today?
I'm doing well, thanks.
So, could you tell me a little bit about the problem you're trying to solve with this project?
Yeah, basically the problem we're solving is that users have lost control of their privacy and personal information. The likelihood of identity theft has never been higher. Like there's a Javelin survey that found that 16.7 million individuals were affected by ID theft in 2017. Second problem is the password model for web authentication is broken. There's no convenient, secure, and private way to access services without giving away even more of your personal information and laying, basically your personal information to bear for the giants of the web, Google, Facebook, Amazon. And they're monetizing that data that they're collecting about you. And we all know this. We've seen, the likes of the Facebook hacks, during the last election and whatnot, where people's data was used to target them for various things. So this is something that is well known by most people. So the problem we're solving is putting that identity data back in control of the user.
And so how are you solving this problem?
lifeID is creating an open public identity protocol for Web 2.0 and blockchain ecosystems to provide users with convenient and secure way to transact their identities. So with a lifeID powered app, users would be able to control the way that they share information about themselves such that they can preserve privacy. And this is where it gets a little bit on the technical side. We are using the technologies that were made famous by the blockchain, the cryptography behind it, to allow you to share only those parts of your private information you need to share to carry out the business process that you're trying to carry out. So for example, let's say I want to rent an apartment and I'm filling out an application, and part of that application requires proof of employment and maybe proof of salary. With a lifeID based system, I can send to that online rental application a cryptographic claim that says my employer is, Acme Widget Makers, and that my salary is above whatever threshold the renting agency requires. Like if they require I earn more than 40K, it might say my salary is greater than 40K. And that claim would be signed by Acme Widget Makers, and the rental agency would just cryptographically prove that, yes, this claim was legitimate and it was legitimately signed by that employment company. And then they can go see if they trust that employer is actually a trustworthy employee to trust this type of information.
And what blockchain are you using to store this information, or is the information being stored on the blockchain?
First of all, that is a great question. The information itself is not stored on the blockchain. What the blockchain serves is a trusted, secure point of coordination for the identifiers, these digital cryptographic identifiers that users and organizations use to represent the individual or the organization in these cryptographic claims. And furthermore, the mechanisms that the users and the organizations have set up to allow them to recover the private keys in those scenarios where maybe they lose them. So The only thing the blockchain does is serve as that point of coordination for the cryptographic identifiers. And then there's one other detail that it does, which is these claims that companies issue. Like, for example, the state of Washington might issue a claim that says, I have a driver's license in this state and I'm allowed to drive. At some point, they may decide to revoke that license for whatever reason, and they can issue a revocation. And that too is stored on the blockchain in a way that's masquerading all of the details. So no personal information is ever stored on the blockchain. So with that said, the blockchain that we are building on is a blockchain called RChain. And RChain is also a Pacific Northwest founded project. So it's kind of exciting to be working in an area where it's sort of a hotbed for blockchain development.
So is this going to be like web-based, or is it going to be an app that I have on my phone?
That's a great question. So the user experience, there's actual several parts to the experience, depending on whether you're an organization rolling out applications or whether you're an end user. The end user experience starts with an app on your phone. And the reason for this is that these identifiers and everything that you do with your identity relies on public key cryptography. And this is public key cryptography is not something it's not like a password that's easy for humans to carry around in their head. And so you do need some device. And smartphones today are the perfect device for being the bridge between the human and the digital world. And they're perfect because, especially with the latest generations, such of iPhones as an example, they have the secure enclave where private keys are stored in a way that it's hard to get them out. And you generally have to prove with fingerprint or facial recognition, whatever, your biometric information to just the phone to unlock those private keys. So end users interact with their identity using a smartphone app. But there's management of those claims and whatnot, which might be web-based applications that businesses would use.
And on the other side, for the people that are kind of granting the credentials, what does it look on their end?
Exactly. So that's a scenario where they would be using the app to bootstrap their authentication to some web service, but that would most likely be a web-based application that you're using a web browser and interacting with a web page, a web service to manage and manipulate those claims.
Now, when someone is, like we were saying about income verification, does my employer need to already have had to put that information into the blockchain, or would the model be that I make a request to my employer for this?
That's also a really good question. So the user experience for each claim would be kind of driven by the particular business that the claim is for. In the case of an employer and a salary verification check, that's probably an example where the employee would request the employer to generate this claim, because it's not something that all employees would need, for example. The proof of employment part of it might come of the form of imagine a future world where your LinkedIn profile has your proof of employment claims on it for others to read, as an example, depending on, obviously, if you, the individual, wants to divulge that private information, obviously, on LinkedIn. But that claim itself, once issued to the user, is held by the user and backed up by the user. So the user is in ultimate control over who they show it to.
Now, what happens if I happen to lose my phone?
That is a great question. So there's basically two answers to that question. The first answer is like every other app on your phone, each phone has a secure backup capability, which you can leverage that if you trust it. So for the things like these claims, there's a lockbox, if you will. They're encrypted, right? I'm using the word lockbox more as a imagery, not an actual lockbox. But you encrypt these all of these claims, and then they can be backed up to either iCloud or whatever the phone supports. Or if you choose not to, if you can choose to have to just go and regenerate all those claims with all those people. Most people probably wouldn't do that. Obviously, it'd be a horrible user experience. The keys themselves, there are as I mentioned, the blockchain is the source of coordinating between the identifiers that you interact with people with and the public keys. The private key associated with those public keys, there's a couple of ways to recover them. One is, and these are all user driven. So the most secure way is if you're really, really paranoid, you use some form of seed, the way that, cryptocurrency wallets work today. So that, the real paranoid individual is probably going to do that. But for others that, I think of, like my mom is in this case, for most of the websites she uses, she wouldn't mind just having a backup mechanism where maybe 5 of her friends that she picks have a part of a secret that they can use to unlock her key for her. So, and technically it doesn't really unlock her key. She would go through a recovery process. She would ask her a couple of those 5 friends to help her with the recovery process. They would initiate that with their app, and it would essentially reconstitute the keys that she needs to regain access to the websites that she's using. So there's a couple different answers on that, depending on what exactly we're talking about being backed up. The keys themselves don't ever get backed up. Those happen through this recovery mechanisms that you establish. And then the claim information, that privacy information, has to be backed up somewhere.
Okay. So what have been some of the challenges of developing this product?
Yeah, that's a great question. So on the technical side, there's a lot of challenges. One is blockchain scalability is a huge issue. So we envision this being sort of think of it as a public utility for the whole world, right? So we want everybody to be able to use this blockchain for this point of coordination for identifiers and identities. So that means we need to scale to many transactions per second. So that's something that I think the blockchain community is struggling with. Ethereum is struggling with, and so that's one reason why we have chosen to build on our chain. Our chain has some very unique scaling properties, and so that's been one of the challenges. Another challenge is building this in such a way that unintended correlation can't happen. So one of the things that I mentioned is that this blockchain is storing these identifiers, and the user pattern is that for each relationship you have, each new account, you have to create a new identifier. And the reason you have to do that is otherwise you run the risk that your identifiers are used to correlate your behavior. So for each individual relationship you have, account you have, or if you want to just set up an encrypted channel between you and a peer to do some exchange, those each create a new identifier to prevent correlation. And the correlation problem is a very difficult problem. Even with that pseudo-anonymity, there are definitely correlation challenges. That's probably the 2 biggest challenges with this style of identity architecture.
So what are some of your plans for the future?
That's a great question. So we have a vision. The lifeID Foundation, which is the foundation that's launching this blockchain, has a goal, as I said, for it to be a public infrastructure identity network for both Web 2.0 and blockchain ecosystems. And so our plan is for this to scale, obviously, to the world. But what's really awesome about this style of identity and sort of an identity architecture that's built on these principles is it really can help serve the underserved. So those regions of the world where people don't have even ability to have an account, or refugees is another one, and the unbanked is another class of people where they can, so long as they have access to a smartphone, which actually is something that is not the barrier for many of these situations I talked about. They can create an identity and start transacting and building up, a digital reputation using just that smartphone. And that's a kind of a long-term goal that we have for this project, is just to be able to have essentially the whole world be able to participate in the digital economy.
Yeah, it's kind of strange that we just have these little cards now that are like anybody can make one that looks just like they're easy to counterfeit, and we have all this amazing technology. We're just not really utilizing it yet. But it's great to hear that you folks are.
Exactly. Yeah. And so that's, we hope that we are building an architecture that really does allow for that kind of, society changing adoption.
Well, it's a really interesting project. Was there anything that I should have asked you that maybe I missed?
So, no, I can't think of anything. This covered most of the basics.
All right. Well, I'll make sure I get all of your links in the show notes. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks, Chris, for coming on the show. Our identity and personal information is so important. It's good to hear that there are projects like lifeID trying to protect and empower us. If you want to learn more about lifeID, check the show notes. I've got all the links down there. You've been listening to Talking Cryptocurrency Podcast. My name is Jason Rigdon, and I've been your host. Thanks for listening to the show. If you liked it, would you please consider giving us a rating and a review on iTunes? I look forward to talking to you again soon. Have a great day.